Imagine for a moment that you're standing at the edge of a threshold. Not a physical one, but something deeper, something older. The kind of boundary that exists between who you think you are and who you truly are beneath all the masks, beneath all the roles, beneath all the stories you've been told about yourself. The air around you feels different here, thicker somehow, more alive, as if the space itself is breathing, waiting, watching to see what you'll choose next. And in this liminal space, suspended between your conscious mind and the vast ocean of your unconscious, 4 symbols appear before you. They're not random. Nothing ever is when it comes to the soul's language. These symbols have been waiting for you, specifically for you, in this exact moment of your life. But here's what most people don't realize. The symbol you're drawn to isn't just a preference. It's not about aesthetics or logic or what looks pretty. It's a message from the deepest part of yourself, the part Carl Jung called the self with a capital S, the part that knows things your conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. And before we go any further, I need you to do something. Close your eyes for just 3 seconds after you finish reading this paragraph. Take 1 deep breath, and when you open them again, I want you to look at these 4 symbols not with your eyes, but with something deeper, with that quiet knowing that lives in your chest, just behind your heartbeat. Are you ready? Because what you're about to discover might shift something fundamental in how you see yourself. And once you see it, once you really see it, there's no going back to the comfortable illusion of who you thought you were. Here are your 4 symbols. 4 mirrors, 4 doorways into your unconscious. The first is a white feather, suspended in midair, caught in a beam of soft golden light. It barely moves, just a gentle rotation, as if the air itself is cradling it with the utmost care. The second is a perfectly balanced stone cairn, each rock placed with precision, standing solid and unwavering against an infinite horizon. The third is a wild flame, dancing freely, changing shape every second, impossible to predict, impossible to contain, yet somehow never burning out. The fourth is a deep pool of water at midnight, so still on the surface that it reflects the stars perfectly. But you sense there are depths below, mysteries that go down further than light can reach. Now, before you choose, let me tell you something crucial.
Jung spent his entire life studying why certain symbols call to us at certain times. He discovered that we don't choose symbols randomly. We choose them because they represent the exact psychological energy we're either embodying right now or desperately needing to integrate. Your unconscious is speaking to you through these images. The question is, are you listening? Don't rush this. Don't let your thinking mind hijack this moment. Just feel. Just notice. Which one pulls at something inside you? Take your time. I'll wait right here. And when you've chosen, when you feel that small click of recognition, that subtle yes in your chest, keep reading. because what comes next will help you understand not just which symbol you chose, but why your soul needed you to see it today. The white feather, the archetype of gentle presence. If your eyes settled on the white feather, if something in you softened when you saw it suspended in that golden light, then listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. There is a rare and precious quality living inside you that the modern world has nearly forgotten how to value. In a culture that screams, that pushes, that demands constant productivity and performance, you carry something the ancients would have called sacred, the ability to simply be. You are what Jung called the feeling type, but not in the way most people misunderstand it. You don't just feel emotions, you feel the texture of reality itself. You sense the invisible currents between people before they speak. You notice the shift in energy when someone is pretending versus when they're real. You can read a room not with your eyes, but with your entire being. This isn't weakness. This is a form of perception that most people have numbed themselves to. You experience the world in layers that others miss entirely. The way afternoon light falls across a wooden table and suddenly you're transported to a memory you didn't know you had. The way someone's voice cracks just slightly and you understand the weight they're carrying without them saying a word. The way silence between two people can be either the most beautiful thing or the most painful, and you always know which one it is. But here's what nobody tells you about carrying this gift. The world will try to convince you that your sensitivity is a flaw, that your need for gentleness is naivety, that your careful, considered way of moving through life is somehow less than the aggressive, loud, fast-paced energy that gets celebrated everywhere you look.
And if you've internalized that message, if somewhere deep inside you've started to believe that you're too much or not enough, I need you to hear this. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not failing at being human. You are water in a world that only knows how to recognize fire. And water, as Jung understood deeply, is one of the most powerful symbols in the collective unconscious. Water doesn't force. It doesn't demand. It doesn't break itself against obstacles. Water flows. Water adapts. Water finds a way. And over time, gently, patiently, persistently, water shapes mountains. Your tenderness is not fragility. It's a different form of strength, one that the world desperately needs but rarely knows how to honor. Now here's something that might surprise you. Jung discovered that people with your archetypal energy often struggle with boundaries, not because you don't know you need them, but because your natural inclination is toward connection, toward understanding, toward giving others the benefit of the doubt. You've probably kept people in your life longer than you should have, not because you're naive, but because you can see their potential, their pain, their humanity. You can feel what they could become if only they'd choose differently. But here's the truth that will set you free.
Your empathy is a gift, but it's not a responsibility to heal everyone who crosses your path. Some people will take your softness and mistake it for weakness. They'll push against your boundaries because they sense you'll bend. They'll demand your emotional energy because they feel how freely you give it. And this is where your current journey is asking you to grow. If the feather called to you today, your soul is telling you something important. It's time to protect your light. Not by building walls, not by becoming hard or shutting down that beautiful sensitivity that makes you who you are, but by learning to discern, by choosing carefully who gets access to your inner world, by understanding that not everyone has earned the right to your tenderness. The people who are truly meant for you will never ask you to be less sensitive. They'll create the safe space where your sensitivity can bloom. In relationships, you don't need passion for passion's sake. You don't need drama or intensity or the kind of love that burns hot and fast. You need something deeper, something Jung called the conjunctio, the sacred union where two people can simply exist together without performance, without masks, without the exhausting dance of trying to be something they're not. You need someone who understands that your quietness isn't absence, it's presence, deep, full, rich presence. Someone who knows that when you're silent, you're not withholding, you're feeling, sensing, absorbing, processing the 1,000 subtle frequencies that most people never even notice.
But before that person arrives, before that connection manifests, you have to do something first. You have to become that safe space for yourself. You have to stop abandoning your own needs in service of others' comfort. You have to learn to say no without guilt, to rest without justification, to honor your own rhythm, even when the world is moving at a different speed. And I know that's not easy. I know you've probably spent years, maybe your whole life, adapting yourself to fit what others needed from you. But the feather chose you today for a reason. It's reminding you of something you've forgotten. Lightness isn't about carrying less. It's about releasing what was never yours to carry in the first place. So here's what your soul is asking of you right now, in this season of your life. More gentleness with yourself. More permission to move slowly, more trust in your own timing, more belief that your way of being in the world is not just okay, it's necessary. The world doesn't need another person performing strength they don't feel. The world needs your authentic softness, your real tenderness, your genuine presence. Because here's what I haven't told you yet, and this is important. People are drawn to your energy in ways you probably don't even realize. Not because you're trying to attract them, but because in a world full of noise and performance and artificial connection, you offer something increasingly rare, the feeling of being truly seen. When someone talks to you, really talks to you, they walk away feeling lighter, not because you fixed their problems, but because you held space for their humanity without judgment, without agenda, without trying to change them into something more convenient. That's not a small thing. That's a sacred thing. And if you've been wondering whether your gentle way of moving through the world actually matters, whether your quiet presence actually makes a difference, let this be your answer. It does, more than you know. Now, before we move to the next archetype, I want you to do something. Take a moment and place your hand on your heart. Feel it beating there, steady and sure, keeping you alive without you ever having to think about it. That's what your gentleness is like. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. It just is, constant and life-giving and absolutely essential. You are the white feather. You are the gentle presence. You are the soft light that guides people home to themselves. And that, more than anything else, is your true power. Drop a comment below and tell me, did the white feather speak to you? And if it did, what's one way you can honor your need for gentleness this week? The stone cairn, the archetype of grounded clarity. If your attention moved toward the stone cairn, if something in you recognized that image of perfect balance and unwavering structure, then you're operating from what Jung called the thinking function, but in its most evolved form. You are not cold. You are not unfeeling. You're clear. And in a world drowning in chaos, confusion, and emotional reactivity, your clarity is not just valuable, it's essential. There's a particular kind of strength you carry that doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't shout, it doesn't perform, it doesn't require external validation to know its own worth. You have what Jung described as a well-developed ego structure, not in the negative sense of being egotistical, but in the psychological sense of having a stable center. You know who you are, and that knowing runs deep. Most people spend their entire lives trying to figure out their identity, constantly shifting based on who they're with, what role they're playing, what's expected of them in any given moment. But you've done something different. You've built an inner architecture, a psychological foundation that doesn't crumble when external circumstances change. This doesn't mean you never doubt yourself. It doesn't mean you never feel lost or confused or uncertain. It means that even in those moments, there's a part of you that remains steady, that can observe the chaos without becoming the chaos. You have what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold tension between opposites without falling apart. When others are drowning in emotion, you can feel and think simultaneously. When others are paralyzed by indecision, you can weigh options and choose. When others are swept away by the mood of the crowd, you can step back and see the larger pattern. But here's what most people don't understand about your type. Your clarity isn't coldness. Your boundaries aren't cruelty. Your ability to walk away isn't heartlessness. It's wisdom. You've learned, probably through painful experience, that not every situation deserves your energy. Not every person deserves your time. Not every drama deserves your participation. And while others might judge this as being detached or uncaring, the truth is exactly the opposite. You care so deeply
that you've had to learn how to protect your capacity to care. You've had to learn that saying yes to everything means saying no to yourself. Jung talked about the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are. For your type, individuation looks like this: learning to trust your inner knowing, even when it goes against what everyone else is doing. Learning to honor your need for order and structure, even in a world that celebrates chaos. Learning to value your own judgment, even when others try to make you doubt it. You don't make decisions impulsively. You don't change your mind based on fleeting emotions. You don't abandon your path because someone else thinks you should take a different one. This can make you seem stubborn to people who don't understand you. But it's not stubbornness, it's integrity. You have a relationship with truth that most people find uncomfortable. Not because you're harsh or judgmental, but because you can see through pretense. You can spot inconsistency. You notice when someone's words don't match their actions, when someone's persona doesn't match their shadow, when the story they're telling doesn't align with the reality they're living. And you can't unsee it. You can't pretend you don't notice. You can't play along with illusions just to keep the peace. This is both your gift and your challenge. Your gift is that you're rarely fooled. You don't waste years of your life on people or situations that were never aligned with your truth. You can cut through confusion and get to the core of what actually matters. Your challenge is that this same clarity can sometimes make you feel isolated. Because when you see clearly and others don't, when you understand the pattern and others are still lost in the details, when you've already made the difficult decision and others are still avoiding it, you can feel profoundly alone. But here's what I need you to understand. Your clarity is not a burden. It's a responsibility. Not to fix everyone else, not to force others to see what you see, but to live your truth so completely that you become a lighthouse for those who are ready to find their own way. Jung believed that the individuated person, the person who has done the deep work of becoming whole, has a natural gravitational pull. They don't need to convince anyone of anything. Their presence, their groundedness, their clarity speaks for itself. And that's you. People might not always understand your choices. They might question why you walked away from something that looked good from the outside. They might wonder why you're so selective about who you let into your inner circle. They might think you're too serious, too intense, too unwilling to just go with the flow. But the people that matter, the people who are on a similar path of growth and self-awareness, they'll recognize you immediately. They'll feel the relief of finally meeting someone who doesn't play games, someone whose yes means yes, and whose no means no. Someone who shows up consistently, who keeps their word, who respects boundaries and expects the same in return. In relationships, you don't need fairy tales. You need reality. You need someone who is as committed to their own growth as you are to yours. Someone who understands that love isn't about losing yourself in another person. It's about two whole people choosing to walk
side by side. You're not looking for someone to complete you. You're looking for someone to match you. And until that person arrives, you're perfectly capable of walking alone. Not because you're afraid of intimacy, but because you understand that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who diminishes your light. Now, here's what your soul is calling you toward in this season. If the stone cairn spoke to you today, you're in a phase of consolidation. You're taking everything you've learned, everything you've experienced, everything you've become, and you're integrating it into a more refined version of yourself. This might look like simplifying your life, removing what's unnecessary, focusing on what actually matters, creating systems and structures that support your goals instead of drain your energy. This is not about becoming rigid. This is about becoming more essentially yourself. Jung talked about the second half of life being the time when we stop trying to be everything to everyone and start focusing on being fully ourselves. And whether you're in the chronological second half of life or not, you're in the psychological second half. You're done performing. You're done pretending. You're done sacrificing your truth for temporary peace. And that shift, that commitment to your own integrity, is what makes you magnetic. Not in a flashy way, not in a loud way, but in a way that draws the right people, the right opportunities, the right experiences directly to you. So tell me in the comments, did the stone cairn call to you? And if it did, what's one thing you're ready to simplify or release to create more space for what truly matters? The wild flame, the archetype of untamed authenticity. If your soul recognized itself in the wild flame, if something in you leapt at the sight of that dancing, unpredictable, impossible to contain fire, then you're living from what Jung called the intuitive function in its most powerful form. You are not chaos. You are flow. And there's a profound difference. Chaos destroys without purpose. Flow moves with purpose, even when that purpose isn't immediately visible to others. You don't follow the prescribed path because somewhere deep in your being, you understand that the prescribed path was never designed for someone like you. You are what Jung would call the creative type, but not just in the artistic sense. You create your life. You create your reality. You create new possibilities where others only see limitations. Your mind doesn't work in straight lines. It works in spirals, in leaps, in sudden flashes of understanding that seem to come from nowhere, but actually come from a place deeper than logic. You have access to what Jung called the collective unconscious, that vast reservoir of human experience and archetypal energy that most people are completely cut off from. And that access gives you a kind of knowing that can't be explained, can't be justified, can't be proven, but is nonetheless absolutely real. You just know things. You know when something is right or wrong for you, not because you've analyzed all the pros and cons,
but because your body tells you, your gut tells you, your soul tells you. And when you ignore that knowing, when you try to logic yourself into something your intuition is screaming no about, you suffer. Not because you made the wrong choice, but because you betrayed yourself. This is your deepest wound and your greatest power. Your wound is that you've probably spent a significant portion of your life trying to fit into structures that were never designed for your kind of energy. School systems that punished your creativity, workplaces that demanded conformity, relationships that required you to be smaller, quieter, more predictable than your soul can tolerate. And every time you've tried to force yourself into those boxes, every time you've suppressed your natural wildness to make others comfortable, a part of you has died. But here's the truth that will resurrect you. You were never meant to fit. You were meant to break the mold. Not destructively, not recklessly, but authentically. You were meant to show others that there's another way to live, a way that honors the soul's need for freedom, for expression, for movement, for truth. Jung believed that the individuated person doesn't follow the collective. They create their own path. And in so doing, they give others permission to do the same. That's your role. That's your purpose. That's why you're here. Not to conform, not to perform, not to prove anything to anyone, but to live so authentically, so unapologetically, so fully as yourself, that you become a living reminder to others of what's possible when you stop betraying your own nature.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. But I have responsibilities, I have bills to pay, I have people depending on me. I can't just follow every impulse and expect life to work out. And you're right. Freedom without consciousness is just another form of prison. Jung was very clear about this. The goal isn't to abandon all structure and responsibility. The goal is to find the structures that support your authentic self, rather than suppress it. This is the work you're being called to right now. If the wild flame spoke to you today, your soul is asking you to examine where in your life you're still performing, still pretending, still shrinking yourself to fit someone else's expectations. Maybe it's a job that pays well but drains your life force. Maybe it's a relationship that looks good on paper but feels dead inside. Maybe it's a version of yourself you've been performing for so long that you've almost forgotten who you really are underneath. Whatever it is, your soul is done with it. And I know that's scary. I know that choosing authenticity often means choosing uncertainty. It means walking away from the known even when the known is comfortable. Because your soul needs more than comfort. It needs truth. Jung talked about the concept of enantiodromia, the idea that when something is pushed too far in one direction, it inevitably swings to the opposite extreme. And if you've been suppressing your wild nature for too long, if you've been forcing yourself to be practical, responsible, predictable, when your soul is screaming for freedom, you're probably feeling that swing starting to happen. Don't fight it. Ride it. But ride it consciously. Don't blow up your life in a fit of rebellion. Don't make choices from reactivity. Make choices from that deep, intuitive knowing that has always guided you when you've been brave enough to listen to it. Here's what most people don't understand about your type. You're not running away from commitments. You're running away from commitments that don't honor who you are. You're not afraid of depth. You're afraid of shallow connections that masquerade as depth. You're not avoiding responsibility. You're avoiding responsibility for things that aren't yours to carry. In relationships, you need someone who understands that loving you means giving you space to breathe. Not because you don't want closeness, but because you suffocate without freedom. You need someone who sees your wildness as beauty, not as something to tame. Someone who understands that your need to move, to change, to explore, to create isn't a rejection of them. It's how you stay alive. It's how you stay you.
And the right person, the person who is truly meant for you, won't feel threatened by your freedom. They'll feel inspired by it. They'll feel invited by it. They'll feel more free themselves because of it. But until that person arrives, you have to be that for yourself. You have to give yourself permission to move at your own pace, to change your mind, to explore new paths, to let go of what no longer serves you, to trust your intuition, even when it doesn't make logical sense. Because here's what I haven't told you yet, and this might be the most important thing. Your intuition isn't random. It's not just feelings or whims or fleeting desires. It's your unconscious mind processing vast amounts of information faster than your conscious mind can keep up with. It's your soul's GPS, guiding you toward the experiences, the people, the opportunities that are aligned with your deepest purpose. When you ignore it, you get lost. When you follow it, even when it seems crazy, even when others don't understand, you always end up exactly where you need to be. So the question isn't whether you should trust your intuition. The question is, what's stopping you? What fear, what belief, what voice in your head is still trying to convince you that your way of being in the world is wrong? That you need to be more like everyone else? That you need to settle down, calm down, slow down, be more realistic, be more practical, be more normal? That voice is not your friend. That voice is the internalized judgment of a world that fears what it cannot control. And you, my friend, are gloriously uncontrollable. Not because you're reckless, but because you belong to yourself. Not to anyone else's expectations, not to society's script, not to the safe, predictable path that leads to a life half-lived. If the flame called to you today, it's time to stop apologizing for your fire. It's time to stop dimming your light to make others comfortable. It's time to explain yourself to people who will never understand. It's time to trust that your path, however unconventional it looks from the outside, is exactly the path your soul chose before you were born. Leave a comment and let me know. Did the wild flame speak to your soul? And what's one way you can honor your need for authentic freedom this week?
If your eyes were drawn to the deep pool, if something in you recognized that still surface hiding infinite depths, if you felt the pull of those reflected stars and the mystery of what lies beneath, then you carry one of the most powerful and misunderstood energies in the Jungian framework. You are what Jung called the introverted, intuitive type, but with a depth that goes beyond any category. There is something about you that people feel before they understand. You enter a space and the energy shifts, not because you're trying to command attention, but because your presence carries weight, substance. gravity. You are not loud, you are not flashy, you are not performing, and yet you cannot be ignored. This isn't something you do, it's something you are, and it comes from a very specific place. You have done the work that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You have descended into your own depths. You have faced your shadow. You have integrated parts of yourself that others keep locked away. Jung called this the night sea journey, and you've taken it. Maybe not by choice. Maybe life dragged you into those depths through loss, through pain, through experiences that shattered who you thought you were and forced you to rebuild from the ground up. But you didn't just survive those depths. You learned to swim in them. And now you carry that depth with you everywhere you go. It's in your eyes. People look at you and they feel seen in a way that's both comforting and unsettling. Because you don't just see their persona, their mask, their carefully constructed image. You see the truth underneath. You see their shadow. You see their potential. You see their soul. And for people who are ready for that level of recognition, who are hungry for real connection, who are tired of surface-level interaction, you are magnetic, irresistible, the answer to a question they didn't know how to ask. But for people who are still hiding, still performing, still terrified of being truly seen, you are threatening, too intense, too much, too real. And you've probably heard that your entire life, haven't you? You're too intense, you're too serious, you're too deep. Lighten up. Not everything has to be so meaningful. But here's what those people don't understand. You're not choosing to be this way. You're not trying to be deep or mysterious or intense. This is simply how you experience reality. Everything has layers for you. Everything has meaning. Everything connects to something larger, something archetypal, something that touches the eternal.
You can't do small talk without feeling like you're suffocating. You can't engage in shallow relationships without feeling like you're betraying yourself. You can't live on the surface when your entire being is designed to explore the depths. Jung understood this. He was this. He spent his entire life diving into the unconscious, exploring the shadow, mapping the terrain of the human soul. And he knew that people like you, people who carry this depth, are essential. Not just for yourselves, but for the collective. Because you hold the space for transformation. When someone is going through their own dark night of the soul, when someone is facing their shadow, when someone is being forced to confront the parts of themselves they've been running from, they don't need cheerful positivity. They don't need surface-level encouragement. They don't need someone to fix them or save them or tell them everything's gonna be okay. They need someone who can sit with them in the darkness without flinching, and that's you. You're not afraid of the shadow, yours or anyone else's. You're not afraid of pain, of grief, of anger, of the messy, complicated, difficult parts of being human. You've been there, you've survived it, and you know that the only way out is through. This makes you a natural healer, but not in the conventional sense. You don't heal people by fixing them. You heal people by seeing them completely, without judgment, without trying to change them, without needing them to be anything other than exactly what they are in this moment. That kind of witnessing is sacred, and it's rare. Most people can't hold that space because they're too uncomfortable with their own depths. But you've made peace with yours.
You've integrated your shadow enough that you can be present with someone else's without getting pulled under. Now here's what you need to understand about your current phase. If the deep pool called to you today, you're in a period of profound inner consolidation. You're not in a phase of external action or dramatic change. You're in a phase of deepening, of integrating, of allowing everything you've learned and experienced to settle into wisdom. Jung talked about the second half of life being the time when we turn inward, when we stop trying to conquer the external world and start exploring the internal one. And whether you're chronologically in the second half of life or not, you're psychologically there. You're done with surface. You're done with performance. You're done with anything that doesn't touch your soul. And this can make you feel isolated, especially if you're surrounded by people who are still living on the surface. But your isolation isn't loneliness. It's discernment. It's your soul protecting itself from connections that would drain rather than nourish you. You're not waiting for just anyone. You're waiting for your match. For the person who can meet you in the depths. For the person who isn't intimidated by your intensity, but drawn to it. For the person who sees your complexity not as something to simplify, but as something to explore, to honor, to cherish. And that person exists. But they won't find you if you're pretending to be lighter than you are. They won't recognize you if you're performing a version of yourself that's more palatable to the masses. They'll only find you when you're being fully, unapologetically, intensely yourself.
In relationships, you don't need passion for passion's sake. You need depth that breathes. You need someone who understands that silence between you isn't empty, it's full of presence, of understanding, of a connection that doesn't need words to be real. You need someone who knows that your stillness isn't absence, it's the deepest form of presence. You need someone who can feel the weight of your attention and recognize it for what it is, a gift. Because when you give someone your attention, when you truly see them, you're offering them something most people will never experience in their entire lives. You're offering them the experience of being witnessed at the soul level. And for the right person, that's more valuable than anything else you could possibly give. But here's the shadow side of your depth that you need to be aware of. Sometimes your ability to see so deeply into others makes you forget to see yourself. Sometimes your capacity to hold space for others' transformation makes you neglect your own needs. Sometimes your comfort with the darkness makes you stay in it longer than you need to. Jung was very clear about this. The goal isn't to live in the unconscious. The goal is to integrate it with consciousness. So, if you've been spending too much time in introspection, in analysis, in the inner world, your soul might be asking you to bring some of that depth back up to the surface, to express it, to share it, to let your inner wisdom become outer action. You have gifts the world needs, insights the collective is hungry for, wisdom that comes from the depths you've explored. And part of your journey now is learning how to translate that depth into a form that others can receive. Not by dumbing it down, not by making it more palatable, but by finding the people who are ready for it and offering it to them in its full, rich, complex truth. Because here's what I know about you. You're not here to live a small life. You're not here to play it safe. You're not here to fit in or blend in
or make yourself comfortable for others. You're here to dive deep, to explore the mysteries, to integrate the shadow, to transform yourself, and in doing so, to create a ripple effect that transforms everyone you touch. That's not a small calling. That's a sacred one. And if the deep pool spoke to you today, it's because your soul is reminding you of this, reminding you that your depth is not a burden, it's your power. Your intensity isn't too much, it's exactly right. Your complexity isn't something to simplify, it's something to embrace, to honor, to express fully. So, stop apologizing for who you are. Stop shrinking to fit spaces that were never designed for someone of your depth. Stand in your full power. Own your intensity. Trust that the right people will not only handle your depth, they'll crave it. Drop a comment below if the deep pool called to you. What's one way you can honor your depth this week instead of apologizing for it?
Now that you've walked through all 4 archetypes, the gentle presence of the white feather, the grounded clarity of the stone cairn, the untamed authenticity of the wild flame, and the magnetic depth of the deep pool, I want to share something with you that Jung spent his entire life trying to help people understand. You are not just one of these. You are all of them. These aren't separate personalities. They're not fixed categories. They're energies that live within you, archetypal forces that you move between, depending on what your soul needs in any season of your life. Some days you need to be the feather. You need gentleness, softness, rest. You need to move slowly, to feel deeply, to honor your sensitivity without apology. Some days you need to be the cairn. You need structure, clarity, boundaries. You need to make decisions, to cut through confusion, to stand firm in your truth. Some days you need to be the flame. You need freedom, movement, expression. You need to break the rules that no longer serve you, to follow your intuition even when it doesn't make logical sense, to dance with the unpredictable. And some days you need to be the pool. You need depth, stillness, mystery. You need to descend into your inner world, to touch your shadow, to touch the eternal truths that live beneath the surface of everyday life. The archetype you chose today simply reflects which energy is most active in you right now. But tomorrow, next week, next month, you might choose differently. And that choice will be just as true, just as valid, just as important. Jung called this the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole. And wholeness doesn't mean being one thing all the time. Wholeness means having access to all of these energies, being able to move fluidly between them, knowing which one your soul is calling for in any given moment. This is psychological maturity. This is integration. This is what it means to be fully human. Most people get stuck in one archetype. They identify with one energy so completely that they lose access to the others. The person who is always gentle loses their ability to set boundaries. The person who is always structured loses their ability to flow. The person who is always free loses their ability to commit. The person who is always deep loses their ability to experience simple joy. But you don't have to be stuck. Now that you've seen these 4 mirrors, now that you've recognized which one is calling to you most strongly right now, you have a choice. You can consciously work with these energies. You can notice when you're overusing one at the expense of the others. You can invite in the qualities you've been neglecting. This is active imagination, one of Jung's most powerful techniques. When you need more gentleness, you can visualize the white feather. You can feel its lightness, its softness, its grace. You can ask yourself, what would the feather do in this situation? When you need more clarity, you can visualize the stone cairn. You can feel its stability, its balance, its strength. You can ask yourself, what would the cairn do in this situation? When you need more freedom, you can visualize the wild flame. You can feel its energy, its movement, its aliveness. You can ask yourself, what would the flame do in this situation? When you need more depth, you can visualize the deep pool. You can feel its stillness, its mystery, its wisdom. You can ask yourself, what would the pool do in this situation? These aren't just metaphors, they're living energies within your psyche. And the more you work with them consciously, the more access you have to their gifts, the more whole you become. Now, here's something crucial that I need you to understand. The world will try to convince you that you need to be consistent, that you need to have one personality, one brand, one way of being that people can rely on.
But Jung knew this was a lie. The only people who are completely consistent are people who are completely unconscious. People who haven't done the inner work. People who are still identified with their persona, their mask, their role. The individuated person, the whole person, the conscious person, is paradoxical. They can be gentle and fierce, structured and free, deep and light. They contain multitudes, as Walt Whitman said, and they're not afraid of those contradictions because they understand that contradictions are where the real truth lives. So if you've been trying to figure yourself out, if you've been trying to put yourself in a box, if you've been confused because you feel like different people in different situations, let me tell you something that might change everything. You're not confused. You're complex. And complexity is a sign of psychological health, not dysfunction. The goal isn't to simplify yourself. The goal is to embrace your complexity, to integrate your contradictions, to become comfortable with the fact that you are a mystery even to yourself. And that mystery, that unknowability, that depth of being is what makes you fully alive. So, now that you've identified which archetype is calling to you most strongly, now that you understand that you contain all 4 of these energies, the question becomes, what do you do with this knowledge? Because knowledge without action is just interesting information. It doesn't transform anything. Jung was very clear about this. The unconscious becomes conscious not through thinking about it, but through living it, through making different choices, through embodying the insights you've gained. So here's your practice for the next 7 days. Every morning when you wake up, before you check your phone, before you jump into your to-do list, before you start performing for the world, take 3 minutes and ask yourself this question. Which archetype does my soul need today? Close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, and feel into your body. Don't think about it.
Feel it. Does your body feel tired, tender, sensitive? You might need the white feather today. Permission to move slowly, to be gentle with yourself, to honor your need for softness. Does your body feel scattered, confused, overwhelmed? You might need the stone cairn today. Permission to create structure, to make clear decisions, to establish boundaries. Does your body feel restless, constrained, trapped? You might need the wild flame today. Permission to break routine, to follow your intuition, to move in ways that feel alive. Does your body feel surface level, disconnected, numb? You might need the deep pool today. Permission to go inward, to feel deeply, to touch the mystery. And once you've identified which energy you need, do one thing, just one thing that honors it. If you need the feather, maybe you take a slower shower. Maybe you skip the news and listen to gentle music instead. Maybe you send a kind message to someone you love. If you need the cairn, maybe you make a list and cross off 3 things. Maybe you have a difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe you clean one space in your home. If you need the flame, maybe you take a different route to work. Maybe you dance in your kitchen. Maybe you say no to something you would normally say yes to out of obligation. If you need the pool, maybe you journal for 10 minutes. Maybe you sit in silence without your phone. Maybe you ask yourself a deep question and actually wait for the answer. These don't have to be big things. Small, conscious choices repeated consistently create massive transformation. Because here's what Jung discovered. The unconscious speaks in symbols, in images, in feelings. And when you respond to those messages, when you take action based on what your soul is telling you, you create a dialogue between your conscious and unconscious mind. And that dialogue is where healing happens. That's where growth happens. That's where you become whole.
Before we close, I need to tell you something that most personal development teachers won't say, because it's not marketable. It's not sexy. It's not what people want to hear. Transformation is not linear. It's not fast. And it's not comfortable. Jung spent decades working with patients, exploring his own psyche, mapping the terrain of the unconscious. And he discovered something that flies in the face of our quick-fix, instant gratification culture. Real change happens slowly, in the dark, beneath the surface, where no one can see it. You don't wake up one day and suddenly you're healed, you're whole, you're individuated. It doesn't work that way. You have moments of insight, followed by long periods of integration. You have breakthroughs, followed by what feels like breakdowns. You have clarity, followed by confusion. You take 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. And that's not failure. That's the process. The unconscious has its own timeline. The soul has its own rhythm. And you cannot force it, cannot rush it, cannot control it with your conscious will. All you can do is show up, stay present, keep listening, keep choosing, keep honoring what your soul is asking for. Some days that will look like progress. Some days it will look like you're going backward. But if you zoom out, if you look at the trajectory over months and years instead of days and weeks, you'll see that you're moving. You're becoming more yourself, more whole, more integrated, more alive. And that's all that matters. Not whether you're moving fast, not whether you're doing it perfectly, not whether anyone else understands or approves. Just whether you're being honest with yourself about what you need, what you feel, what you know to be true in the deepest part of your being.
So here's my invitation to you as we close this journey together. Stop trying to figure yourself out. Start experiencing yourself. Stop trying to be consistent. Start being authentic. Stop trying to fit into categories. Start embracing your complexity. You are the white feather and the stone cairn and the wild flame and the deep pool. You are gentle and strong, structured and free, surface and depth, light and shadow. You are all of it, and that's not confusion, that's wholeness. Jung spent his entire life trying to help people understand this one simple truth. You are not broken. You are not incomplete. You are not missing anything. You are a universe unto yourself, containing infinite depths, infinite possibilities, infinite expressions of what it means to be fully human. And your only job, your only real work in this life is to explore that universe with curiosity, with courage, with compassion. Not to judge it, not to fix it, not to make it more acceptable to others. Just to know it, to be it, to live it fully. So, take what resonated with you from this journey, leave what didn't, and most importantly, trust your own inner knowing about what your soul needs right now. Because you already know. You've always known. You just needed permission to listen. And if this journey helped you hear yourself more clearly, if something shifted inside you as you read these words, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below and tell me which archetype called to you today. And more importantly, what's one small way you're going to honor that energy this week? And if you found value in this exploration of Jungian psychology and want to go deeper into understanding your unconscious mind, your shadow, your archetypes, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because we're going to keep diving into the depths together, one insight at a time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for choosing consciousness over comfort, depth over surface, truth over performance. The world needs more people like you, people who are willing to look inward, people who are brave enough to face their shadow, people who are committed to becoming whole. Keep going, keep growing, keep listening to your soul. And remember, you're not lost. You're exactly where you need to be.